Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. I appreciate you joining me for this live stream. If you're not live and here, what are you doing with your life, honestly? This is going to be a bit of a big one. There's an awful lot to go through. My goodness, just a ton of information. We're going to be talking about the Epstein files, but we're not really going to be talking about them in terms of what most people are obsessed with, and for good reason, right? The Epstein files. Jeffrey Epstein was evidently a horrible human being doing terrible stuff to do with sex trafficking. But and this is not to detract at all from the victims of the sex trafficking, right? This is not to say anything about, how horrific the crimes that Epstein committed were. But the sex trafficking, as far as I see it, was a means to an end, but it wasn't the end itself. What we need to understand is what Jeffrey Epstein was a networker and a man that used those networks for his advantage. And part of that was getting leverage and kompromat and blackmail. And he used sex trafficking to do that. He also enjoyed that himself, no doubt, etc., etc. And so all of this horrific stuff to do with sex trafficking that we are somewhat obsessed with in the media and in society, because of its salaciousness probably, and all of those kinds of things, that is actually detracting away from what has, and this might sound pretty heartless and controversial, but it shouldn't be, the larger global implications of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. And so the Epstein files, the Epstein scandal was, for many people, predominantly about this sex trafficking. But that is something that horribly affects the people who were involved directly, the victims of those crimes. But actually, there's something that affects the world in a much greater sense, like much bigger sense. And that was what was going on with his networking, who he was dealing with, who he was connecting to whom. And that has a far greater sort of geopolitical reach. And that's kind of where we're going to be focusing today. But remember, I'm not taking away from the suffering of the people involved. And it's just not something I'm going to deal with all that much in today's video. Yeah, there you go. We are going to start, I think, by looking at how I think Donald Trump has been reacting to the release of the Epstein files, because, as you all know, another 3 million or so files were released, but clearly not all of the files. There's a lot of footage and imagery that has not been released. There's a lot of sensitive material, and you can rest assured that the Trump administration is feverishly trying to redact or just get rid of evidence that implicates him in anything here, and he keeps denying it. He's said again in press conferences, what are you doing focusing on this? You need to be focusing on other things, which I think is kind of French for, oh my goodness, I am implicated here, panic, 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 let's try and get you to think about other things by distracting you. But I think, Trump is deeply involved in this one way or another. Okay, so, and I will be talking about Mandelson. Goose Springsteen, as a conservative viewer here, says, hey, JP, I know there'll be a lot to cover, but I think this incident regarding the disclosure about Mandelson has sealed Starmer's fate. I don't think that's, and I think that is largely opportunism. It is bad. I'm going to talk about how bad it is for the Labour Party, but actually I think that's distracting you away from much more serious things than that, which we'll build towards. So we'll spend quite a lot of time on this, on the UK side of things, later in the video. He'll be gone by May, if not the end of the month, in my humble opinion. I don't think so. And especially if you look at what sort of Trump does, which is shrug things off and say whatever. The idea that Mandelson's involvement is any worse than or any more controversial than Bannon and Farage and AFD and Rassemblement National and the entire European right being connected through Epstein, I think is somewhat naive. But of course, it's going to be opportunistically jumped on by opposition in the UK, and they're going to use that as a baton to as a club to beat Starmer with, but Starmer came out today and gave a pretty strong response to it, which I think was well considered. But we'll talk about actually what was going on there, and how irresponsible Starmer was or wasn't in appointing Mandelson, etc. Because it's slightly more complex than I think some people give it credit for being, especially since many people on the opposition also advocated for Mandelson's appointment. You know, it was not pushed back upon by either the press or the opposition opposition parties, which is pretty interesting. So, you know, there's a bit of humble pie to be eaten. Okay, so where are we going to start? We are going to start with looking at, as I mentioned, sort of start with kind of how it's fallen in Trump world. Start with this interesting quote that comes out from Jeffrey Epstein from one of the emails. I have met some very bad people, none as bad as Trump, not one decent cell in his body. Okay, so when you have one of the, what as many people would consider one of the most evil men in the last sort of 20 years or so, right, saying, you think I'm bad, check out this guy over here, pointing at Trump, then I think that should be pretty worrying. What does that say about Donald Trump? You know, yeah, I find that a pretty interesting statement. Now, Donald Trump was asked a question the other day in the Oval Office by Caitlin Collins from CNN, and this is his response. And if this doesn't tell you that he's implicated, I don't know what will.
Yeah, what do you want?
On the Epstein files, you talked about Democrats who were in there. Elon Musk was also in there, and so was your Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and correspondence that he had with him. Did you read those new files that were published by the Department of Justice?
I didn't. I have a lot of things I'm doing, a lot of things, and I don't know. You mentioned two names. I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure they're fine. Otherwise, it would have been major headlines.
A lot of women who were.
So, which is, I'm going to interrupt this, and I'm going to bring you back to Goose Springsteen's comment. And I'm not saying this is a good thing, by the way. No, in fact, I'm saying the opposite. So Trump's position here is, oh yeah, a couple of people mentioned in there, and I've appointed them. You know, Howard Lutnick, he's in there. He's lied. He's on camera lying. In 60 Minutes, he gave that interview where he said he had nothing. You know, he spoke with Jeffrey Epstein, found him to be creepy, him and his wife, and never spoke to him again. And then he's in the Epstein files, wanting to go to a party on one of his islands or whatever. So, you know, clearly lying. And Trump just goes, yeah, whatever. So the idea that this is going to be the end of Starmer because he appointed someone who's in the Epstein files erroneously, we can debate that later, as the ambassador to the US, that's going to be the end of Starmer. Here you've got Trump just in a far worse. Trump is way more implicated than Mandelson even, let alone Starmer. And Trump's just sitting there going, I'm not bothered. Now, that's bad. He should be bothered. But I think there's a categorical difference here between Trump and Starmer. Obviously, Starmer isn't in the Epstein files, but Trump is an awful lot. And so are loads of people he's very implicated with or very friendly with. So anyway, this is how he continues.
Survivors of Epstein's are unhappy with those redactions that came out. Some of them, entire witness interviews are totally blacked out. Do you think that they should be more transparent?
They thought they released too much. You know, I heard that. And you tell me something else. No, I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else. You know, now that nothing came out about me, other than there was a conspiracy against me, literally by Epstein and other people. But I think it's time now for the country to maybe get onto something else.
But what would you say to people who feel like they haven't gotten justice, Mr. President?
Something that people care about. Yeah, what did you say? Go ahead.
What would you say to the survivors who feel like they haven't gotten justice?
You are so bad. Then he's like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I've told you we need to be talking about something else. You know, like healthcare. You are so bad for talking about this.
The worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. You know, she's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile
well,
on your face.
I'm asking you about survivors.
You know why? You know why you're not smiling? Because you know you're not telling the truth. And you're
she's asking a question.
Organization, and they should be ashamed of you.
And then goes on to another question, right? So he refuses to answer difficult questions, which should tell you something like he is at least somewhat guilty. I mean, that's what it says to me. Absolutely incredible stuff there. As Don Windsor says, Donald Trump just went on a disgusting, unhinged rant against Caitlin Collins, and not one White House reporter stood up or defended the gross personal attack on her. And then she got back to CNN, and Casey Hunt just goes back to her interview and says nothing, not even supported by her own CNN colleagues. This is why Trump wins. And I think there's a really, aside from the Epstein files, there's a really interesting discussion to be had around this idea that there's no collegiality with reporters, that no one holds Trump to account for treating fellow reporters in disgusting ways. But yeah, so back to the Epstein files, though, it's worth noting that this latest tranche that were released, then a whole bunch of them got deleted because they implicated Trump. That's very clear from the numbers here. Brian Krasenstein said proof that DOJ is scrubbing Epstein files with Trump's name in them. Today there are 1,513 results for Donald Trump. Yesterday at 9:15 there are 199 more with 1,712. If they are doing all of this in front of the public, just imagine what they did behind closed doors. So they are scrubbing them in front of your eyes, right? Ones that are problematic for Trump. So they're the ones that got through. Imagine what they've actually done with ones that you are not seeing and you will never see. This is the real worry. In fact, that number has increased. Just in 541 files related to Trump have been deleted. DOJ continues to delete files containing the word Trump. Originally, there were 5,361, and today there are 4,820. And I'm sure that will continue. Now, here's an interesting one that got through because one presumes it was handwritten and wasn't typed out, and therefore you can't do a Control F and find certain words like Trump. Wow, no one found this horrific Donald Trump mentioned in the Epstein files because it was handwritten letter that wasn't indexed properly by the DOJ. How convenient. This woman alleges that Donald Trump was involved with Jeffrey Epstein in the sale of young women to the sex trafficking ring of Epstein and the Saudis. She also claims that Trump forced her to miscarry after she got pregnant. See the entire 32-page letter on the DOJ website. I wonder if that is still there. So yeah, there's a bunch of horrible stuff involving Trump and involving others. But I want to move beyond that into like joining the dots. It's worth noting, and I think this is actually something that Goose Springsteen has just mentioned, and I'll bring this into play now because this is an important point. From a media point of view, the lack of curiosity about how Epstein went from teacher to billionaire financier is notable. So it is a mystery how Epstein really made his money, and then he ends up having huge amounts of money that is being wire transferred everywhere, and he's the spider in the middle of the web that connects everyone. But there's a mystery of how he got from A to B. And this is a very, very good point. And this needs some this is the sort of thing that the Epstein files and the DOJ should be investigating, of course. But they don't seem to want to touch it, I think, because there are so many connections with international intelligence agencies like Mossad and like the FSB in Russia. And we're starting to see these connections. But as Goose correctly says, the problem is you start sounding like a conspiracy theorist when you come up with this stuff. It's very likely he was an intelligence agent, but you start to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I think we've got to a point where this is now in the domain of being plausible, if not probable, right? And we need to stop thinking in terms of conspiracy theories, because actually all the dots are there to, well, not all of them, because unfortunately the DOJ won't let us have all of them, but there are a lot of dots that can be joined here. And I think the mere fact that he became so rich so mysteriously is itself another piece of the jigsaw puzzle that creates this picture that actually he was involved with obviously very rich people, with billionaires and movers and shakers, but probably intelligence agencies as well. Goodness me, if I was an intelligence agency like Mossad or the FSB, he would be my number one guy. Like, here's a guy that clearly has kompromat, clearly has connections. Like, he is your classic honeypot guy. Like, so yeah, it would be amazing if he wasn't anything to do with intelligence agencies. Now, Elon Musk recently went from saying previously he was claiming that no one is pushing the files to be released more than me. And now he's reposting Katie Miller, Stephen Miller's wife, saying the Epstein files is a Democrat hoax perpetuated on the American people. So it's gone from like, no one says more about is pushing these files more than me. I'm the one that's been putting pressure on Trump, to like, it's a Democrat hoax. I agree with this person. It's a Democrat hoax. You're like, oh my goodness, so many people just seem to be falling into line over this. But the world's richest man, Elon Musk, is weaponizing X's algorithm to brand European leaders as traitors to their own people. Now, okay, what's this source talking about? What I want to do is join some other dots as well. So largely what's going on with the Epstein files is that he is the node that links a ton of particularly big tech billionaires, but very powerful people in the tech industry or tech affiliated and very big businessmen. And these days you can't do business without being something to do with tech, right? Tech helps you do your business. So, you know, big tech is involved very much in the Epstein files with who Epstein connects to whom. And when you have then people trying to hold big tech to account, there is this kind of, you're wondering how much is protecting themselves from accountability and how much is protecting themselves from being investigated in terms of the Epstein files. You know, it's all somewhat connected in some way, like the power of X and the power of OpenAI and the power of these tech companies and platforms to be able to do what they want and not have pushback and not have regulation is partly as a result of them getting into the positions they have by knowing the people they know and being the people that they are. You know, Peter Thiel is at the heart of a lot of this, as we're going to see. But Elon Musk is there or thereabouts. Now, what's happened is Spain, the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, has come out and said, we are going to ban social media for under 16s. And we've had that in Australia. And then you've had this pushback against Sanchez and against, say, the Australians from people like Musk. So Musk is now calling Sanchez a fascist, a dictator, a tyrant, all this kind of stuff. And he's using X to push back against regulation and against what he sees as the officious kind of fascistic EU. And this is all about, you know, big tech trying to negotiate itself into all of these democracies to a position of complete dominance and then control those democracies. And we can see that with Palantir, possibly. And it's going on with X and Elon Musk. So let's return then to this idea. So, you know, Sanchez pushes back and you've got the French investigating X. You've got the Spanish looking at holding them to account. And the world's richest man, Elon Musk, is weaponizing X's algorithm to brand European leaders traitors to their own people. If that's existential disinformation and hybrid interference, could European governments justify an extraordinary rendition? The US did it with Zambada. So, you know, is Europe going to push back against this kind of activity where European leaders are being denigrated and there's disinformation being spread about them by these big tech oligarchs and oligarchs? But so then let's get on to, okay, well, what really was Jeffrey Epstein doing then? Yes, he was involved, and I'm not belittling this, in this sex trafficking ring, but that was a means to an end. That was a way of networking. That was how you got certain people in, but not all people. For example, Mandelson wasn't involved in the sex trafficking. The man is a gay man with a husband, and so he's not going to be involved in the sex trafficking of young girls, I'm pretty sure. But there were an awful lot of other people who were involved with Epstein who weren't implicated in the sex side of things, but are implicated in the other side. And remember, this is a subset of the larger umbrella of networking for power, right? So this article says the smart, the rich, the powerful. Epstein associated with Silicon Valley elite years after his release from prison. Billionaires and intellectuals attended events with the disgraced financier years after he served time for sex offense, files reveal. Newly released files, emails and travel itineraries appear to show that for years after Jeffrey Epstein served time for procuring underage girls for prostitution, he continued to attend exclusive dinners alongside Silicon Valley's most famous billionaires. The emails part of a trove release, blah, 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 blah. And you have all of these people. Yeah, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin, Twitter co-founder Evan Williams, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, and Google vice president and later Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer. So these are all people involved with Jeffrey Epstein, but not all of those are, or maybe none of those aforementioned people were involved on the sexual side of things, or some of them were. I don't know exactly, right? But you've got these sort of networks, like the Edge Network, a creation of literary agent John Brockman, who offered a platform for public commentary by artists, technologists, and intellectuals, along with sumptuous dinners and exclusive conferences for the rich, the smart, and the powerful. So that there are all sorts of different things going on with Jeffrey Epstein, all sorts of different forms of networking. And a lot of it has to do with fundraising. And if you are the guy that knows big people with big money, then it's not so much that you go to Jeffrey Epstein to get funding, but you go to Jeffrey Epstein to get contacts with other people who are going to fund you. So Rory Stewart talks about this as someone himself who's been involved in fundraising. His wife is a CEO of a charity, I think, and he himself has been involved with was it Stanford University or Harvard University that Rory Stewart's been involved with, and therefore is always involved with fundraising, as these big universities are always looking for funding. He talks to Alistair Campbell about how the network really kind of how it works and what's going on here.
You've worked in the States and you've worked in the kind of charitable sector trying to get these very, very wealthy people to give you money. I don't know how much time you've had to actually look at this latest stuff because there's so much stuff, but what's your US take on it?
Well, let's start with that, because one of the questions is, what the hell did all these people, and you've mentioned some, and you can add Woody Allen and Larry Summers, and George Stephanopoulos is turning up at parties, and George Mitchell, right? So what are they all doing? Right? How do they all get dragged in? I was thinking about this, and I do know, partly because when I was fundraising initially at Harvard and charities and many other things, I saw a little bit of this world. And the first thing is that somebody like Epstein is able to network by leveraging money and contacts.
Yeah.
And in the case of Epstein, this is an evil man who is also simultaneously trafficking and abusing vulnerable underage girls. But the bigger story actually applies to many, many, many of these people, their ability to create these networks. So what actually happens at Epstein's parties? Number one, let's take Larry Summers. So Larry Summers is somebody I know reasonably well. He was the president of Harvard.
Also a cabinet minister.
And a cabinet, was secretary of the Treasury, under Bill Clinton. So really big figure, and was the chairman of OpenAI most recently. He's just had to resign because of Epstein. So what happens there? Well, first thing is Epstein is somebody who's giving money to Harvard, gives $8 million to Harvard. So one of the things these universities do, they're perpetually fundraising. Or anyone running a charity, they're always short of money. So someone comes to you and they'll say, listen, you've got to meet this guy, Jeffrey Epstein. He's extraordinary. He could give you $8 million like that if he wanted to come along to the dinner party meeting. Right? Number two, it turns out Larry Summers is raising money for his wife's small charity. So now we have the university, which is professional. We have the wife. Number three, Epstein is giving him dating advice. So the texts going back and forth are Larry saying, I went out for dinner with this girl, but she hasn't been back in touch with me for a few days. And Epstein's writing back saying, don't worry about it, Larry. Play hard to get. She's pretending she's going out with a biker, but really you'll get back in. With other ones, these billionaires, he's giving them apparently medical advice on their sexually transmitted diseases. With a wealthy Emirati who owns a huge global company, that's just a man called Sultan Ahmed bin Suleim, they're sharing pornographic videos with each other. They're sharing sick jokes. So guys going out in Dubai, and Epstein's like, no girl in Dubai is safe tonight. But they're also trading endless micro favors. So Sultan bin Abu Salim will say, I'm going to the Trump inauguration. Can you arrange for Trump to shake my hand? And Epstein's a friend of Trump's, right? Then Epstein will get back and say, I have
another sexually transmitted disease.
Say I have a Russian woman who
I
want to be trained as a masseur. Can you arrange for him to be trained in a hotel in Turkey? Then he will get in touch with a Turkish billionaire who owns a huge hotel chain, who says, no problem, I'll make it happen. Now, if you break down all the things that I've mentioned in my last sort of 2-minute rant, there are so many different things going on there. There's professional fundraising, there's personal fundraising, there's business connections, there's political introductions, right? Now, add to this, he also will invite Nobel Prize winners to dinner. He will put 21 physicists on a private island with him in order to discuss the future of gravity. You go to a dinner at his house and you've got Nobel Prize winners on one side and you've got film stars on the other. And then he does another trick. I'm going to stop doing this, but I just want to sort of explain the way that someone like this works, right? He now becomes the guy who if you want to know what's happening in British politics, he's got Mandelson on speed dial. If you want to know what's happening in Israeli politics, Ehud Barak is staying in his house. He's got insight into what's happening in Russia.
He's also offering his services, it strikes me, to the Russians in how to deal with Trump.
Offering services to Russians, how to deal with Trump. And then there are all these Russian girls. So there's a very interesting question of intelligence connections with Russia, with other intelligence agencies around the world, because he's the perfect agent of influence for an intelligence agency, because he can compromise people, he can blackmail people, he knows everybody. He's also moving their money around. So let's imagine you were a big American investment bank.
Like
right?
JP Morgan.
Like JP Morgan, which actually incidentally has settled separately with Epstein's victims for other stuff. But let's not get specific on JP Morgan. Generally, the structure is like this. Somebody contacts you. They could be from a country that's on the edge of being sanctioned, or there could be some questions about where their money came from. You facilitate with the American Investment Bank to open an account for them. You provide tax sheltering advice so that the person putting the money in doesn't get too involved. Then in return, you help the bank get inside information on how to change banking regulation in another country. And at the center of this whole world is this guy. Now, the really extraordinary thing is not how people are seeing him before 2008, because before 2008, the story is quite straightforward, right? I say to you, Alistair, listen, you know, you're interested in raising money for this mental health charity. I know this amazing guy called Jeffrey Epstein who has these incredible parties in his penthouse in New York. Come along. It's extraordinary. You will meet Woody Allen. You will meet a Nobel Prize winning physicist. Larry Summers will be there. He'll write a check for you. Oh, and listen, if you are late for a football match, he's got a private plane and he'll fix it to get you there. Right? But then he's sent to jail. He's sent to jail for trafficking. And the extraordinary thing is that then after 2008, Mandelson continues to stay with him.
Summers.
A lot of these people that we've mentioned, very, very well-known people, continue to go to his parties.
Including people like Howard Lutnick, current Commerce Secretary, who has made a big thing about...
So on and so forth. So you get this idea that this guy is providing all sorts of different services, if you like, for all sorts of different people. And these people are very, very important. And then when he goes to prison, unfortunately, most human beings aren't very good at doing morality. And so they go, well, I liked what this guy was doing for me, either in the kind of sexual domain or just in the networking domain, you know, in his ability to make me money or safeguard my money from tax or help me get regulation, a sense of regulation in a foreign country by putting, you know, whatever, right? He offers benefits, if you like, to people, and people will compartmentalize, or they will just make an evaluation that it's more important that I get a benefit than I stop associating with this guy because he's a creep. Or, you know, or the cognitive dissonance reduction, like I always talk to you about. Our brain does amazing work every day in like minimizing the impact of certain things that we don't like for one reason or another, and we reduce the cognitive dissonance that happens. So the core belief is that I'm a decent guy and I will always do the right things, and then I've got this evidence that, well, this guy's a convicted sex trafficker or done for prostitution or whatever it was in 2008, and it's like, I'm a good guy, but but if I still want to, you know, make money or have this benefit from hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein, so this causes a dissonance in my brain. How do I deal with that dissonance? And you'll do all sorts of different things, or all sorts of heuristics, mental gymnastics that you will go through in order to minimize that. And that's basically what seems to have happened. Now, I think when you are a rich, very powerful elite, I think you can very easily discard a morality. I think that's what happens. Like people like you and I, hopefully you and I are strong with our moral convictions, but then we don't have millions of dollars on the line. Now, when you have millions of dollars on the line, then I would assume that plays merry havoc with your sense of morality. Now, I would like to think, because I have quite a strong moral sense, that I wouldn't be so victim to that, but I've never been in that position myself. So, you know, it sounds a bit haughty of me to say so, but people are different, right? And those that wouldn't react, those that wouldn't put up with that, won't put up with that. So didn't associate with Jeffrey Epstein, all those people who did associate with Jeffrey Epstein, particularly after 2008, when it was definitely known who he was, they have, I think, a degraded moral compass, right? And that, but what's really going on is the networking, and as I've mentioned many times, the sex trafficking is part of that networking, and a method to get as much as you can, if you're Jeffrey Epstein, from your networking. And one of these people heavily involved is Peter Thiel. Another one is Steve Bannon. And what we're really starting to understand is the sheer scale of the networking, and actually that there's potentially something more insidious, and the sense of a larger global geopolitical agenda going on here, of literally of governmental shifts, of like wanting to see. So Steve Bannon, when he was kicked out of Trump 1.0, he went to Europe to start up this right-wing network of right-wing, far right-wing populist parties, which are still profiting from his involvement all these years later, whether it be AfD, whether it be Reform, whether it be Rassemblement National, whoever it is. He went over from the United States to try and get the EU to go much more further to the right. But you can see that he used Jeffrey Epstein in order to be able to do that as effectively as he was wanting. And there are others who were involved in that kind of thing. So here we've got Pedro Gonzalez says, wow, this sucks. Anyway, care to comment on this email between your mentor, Peter Thiel? So he's talking to JD Vance here. So JD Vance has been silent on this for like 5 days. He said nothing. Like, considering JD Vance as a vice president previously, before he became vice president, was banging on about the Epstein files and saying that, making these really robust claims concerning the Epstein files. And as soon as he's in a position to be able to make sure the Epstein files are looked at in a very detailed manner and a very transparent manner, he's nowhere to be seen. So he's like went silent for 5 days. He's like, do you care to comment on this email between your mentor, Peter Thiel? So remember, Peter Thiel paid for JD Vance to become senator in Ohio. He actually Peter Thiel employed JD Vance, then funded him with the biggest senatorial funding ever to make him the senator for Ohio, and then campaigned for him to become the vice presidential pick. And that, I think it was Don Trump Jr., was the guy that Peter Thiel used to get JD Vance nominated as a vice president, because Donald Trump wasn't going to do it. So anyway, care to comment on how your mentor Peter Thiel and Jeffrey Epstein and how they talk about engineering the collapse of America in a way that would be beneficial to them. So here we have, typical Peter Thiel, Jeffrey Epstein conversations. Return to tribalism, counter to globalization, amazing new alliances. You and I both agreed zero interest rates were too high. And as I said in your office, finding things on their way to collapse was much easier than finding the next bargain. Brexit, just the beginning. Brexit, just the beginning. Peter Thiel, Jeffrey Epstein, Brexit, just the beginning. So I really don't want this to be a relitigation of Brexit, but there needs to be an investigation into Russian influence in Brexit and these people's influence into Brexit. And in fact, politics in Europe as a whole. We need to be learning from the Epstein scandal that, we need to concentrate on getting justice for the victims. But there are other victims in this, and they are political victims. They are the electorates of countries who have been interfered with on account of the people involved in the Epstein scandals and what Jeffrey Epstein did to link all these people together. Peter Thiel is in the Epstein files saying democracy, quote, democracy is a failed experiment, as Peter Thiel, and that women and poor people should have never had the right to vote, and they are strategically positing how to stop both. They also used Epstein to pressure governments to get their way, one of Trump's biggest donors, Peter Thiel. And, Peter Thiel's techno-fascism is a problem that we need to deal with, right? So here is a Bylines timepiece. Palantir owner Peter Thiel, who holds 100 million pounds of sensitive UK government contracts, who holds hundreds, it's actually billions, arguably, facilitated by Epstein associate Peter Mandelson, was co-owner of a $1 billion fund with Jeffrey Epstein, both connected to senior Russian officials. And we're going to get onto Russia in a wee while. So Peter Thiel is a big issue here. I mean, this is someone putting together, this is Yoni Escola, who I like, putting together a kind of profile of Peter Thiel. Meet Peter Thiel, one of the most powerful and dangerous people in the world, yet too few people know about him. He's not just a billionaire, he's a political engineer, a surveillance capitalist, and a man quietly shaping America's future, and not for the better. Thiel doesn't believe in democracy, he believes in techno-fascism. Or techno-authoritarianism. He's openly said freedom and democracy don't mix. He funds candidates who want to dismantle government and replace it with corporate control. This isn't eccentric, it's extremist. He's behind the scenes of plans to remake America from mass surveillance to authoritarian policy blueprints. His vision, a future where data rules, privacy dies, and power is centralized in the hands of a few. He's building a future where democracy is optional, surveillance is constant, and dissent is punished. Ignore him at your peril. He's already rewriting the rules. So that sounds a bit scary, but when you read what's going on in the Epstein files, he is putting those bricks in place, right? So this is really it's not either or. This is what I think we around the world politically should be focusing on with the Epstein files, because it has a far greater reach and impact in our daily lives than the horrors of the sex scandal have. And this is Peter Thiel, as according to The Nerve, and his techno-fascism. What's happening in America is techno-fascism. It could happen here. Peter Thiel's data company is powering ICE operations in the US. And Carol Cadwallader, as a journalist, argues that the UK will be next. So they map his network. You know, the UK, huge number of people. Peter Mantelson's one, but don't think that is a be all and end all of the British connections. Nigel Farage, James Orr, Nick Candy, the treasurer to reform, Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, Lewis Mosley. And then you got Steve Bannon, who's another one of these people connecting everyone. Donald Trump, JD Vance, Donald Trump Jr., Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, Mark Zuckerberg from Meta, Larry Ellison from Skydance, now Paramount Skydance, now owners of CBS. We've seen CBS get skewed towards the right and become completely pro-Trump. Sam Altman, Elon Musk. You know, this is so deeply worrying. I've been through these before. I won't read these again, but you can see, you can pause the screen if you want and look at how Mark Zuckerberg, Alex Karp, Larry Ellison, Sam Altman, Elon Musk are all connected to Peter Thiel. You can look at how Donald Trump Jr., JD Vance, Donald Trump himself, Steve Bannon are all connected to Peter Thiel in their own way. You know, for me, like the Jeffrey Epstein files are as much about Peter Thiel as they are about Jeffrey Epstein. Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, Peter Mandelson and Keir Starmer, Lewis Mosley, Dr. James Orr, Nigel Farage, connected to Peter Thiel. Palantir is less a technology company than a political project. That's not speculation. For Thiel, technology is politics. And so they've written, there's a couple of really good pieces in The Nerve, this new independent news organization. What's happening in America is techno-fascism. It could happen here. And they go to talk, or Carol Cadwallader goes to talk about how Palantir is at the center of everything. I've shown you this before, where Alex Karp, the CEO in the middle, is saying he's really proud of what he does for Palantir, even if it means killing. If you come up against us, you'll end up dying. He's kind of glorifying the death of the enemies of Palantir because it's a defense firm. They get to kill people. And he's kind of like happily talking about that in a meeting, an online meeting there. It's absolutely incredible. So Palantir has nearly £1 billion worth of contracts with the UK at national and local government level. So this is just the UK. Imagine what it has in the US then. Here are, some of the contracts, and a lot of these are unknown. But yeah, just huge number of contracts that they have with all sorts of different either departments like the MOD, Ministry of Defence, police forces, city councils, local city councils, the NHS, National Health Service. In fact, I've showed you this before. Palantir deals with the UK state total at least 670 their deals total at least 670 million, including 15 million contract with Nuclear Weapons Agency. That's probably conservative because a lot of these are unknown numbers. Here is what I showed you previously, which is an infographic of all the contracts just with the UK. So now replicate that across the world. It's not just going to be the UK. It's going to be obviously the United States. There'll be even more contracts with the United States, no doubt. ICE, for example. Here we've got the MOD, Highways England, central government, and blah, blah, blah. London 2012 Olympics, even local councils, Cabinet Office, DEFRA, NHS, Department of Health and Social Care, the Home Office, GCHQ, so our spies, MI5 and MI6, Government Digital Services, Department for Levelling Up and Communities, Home Office, Cabinet Office, etc., etc. This is really, really wide scale. And Peter Thiel is facilitated in doing all this work with the connections that he gets through Jeffrey Epstein. Novara Media, this is an avowedly left-wing media source, so just so you know who it is, but this is how they interpret it. Jeffrey Epstein co-owned a venture capital fund controlled by Peter Thiel, founder of spy tech firm Palantir, which is now deeply embedded in the British state. The latest Epstein files drop from the US Ministry of Justice shows that billionaire Thiel maintained a business relationship with Epstein from 2014 to the paedophile's final arrest in 2019. Email exchanges show Thiel repeatedly arranging to meet with Epstein after the latter's conviction for child sex offences and cultivating a relationship of scheduled meals, calls and link-ups. As co-owner of Thiel's firm Valar Ventures, a venture capital fund co-founded by Thiel to invest in fintech and financial services companies around the world, Epstein received confidential and time-sensitive investment opportunities, according to the latest files release. Palantir holds more than 670 million in UK government contracts, including NHS patient data, Ministry of Defence operations, police intelligence databases, and nuclear weapons management. Labour grandee and former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, leaked sensitive UK secrets to Epstein between 2009 and 2010, and later aligned himself with Thiel's Palantir. Palantir hired Mandelson's lobbying firm, Global Counsel, to help it secure UK government contracts in 2018. For me, the Mandelson issue is around Peter Thiel and Palantir. Like I am less concerned with Peter Mandelson's associations in general with Jeffrey Epstein. I think that's morally bad, right? But it's not something that I'm deeply concerned about, because I think it shows a lack of moral judgment, but it doesn't affect me as a British citizen. What affects me as a British citizen is how it appears Peter Mandelson was able to help out Palantir to get loads of contracts, actually with the Conservative government at the time, but those contracts are now continuing into the Labour government now. According to the Byline Times investigation, this occurred at the same time that Epstein was operating as an active Valar Ventures partner, receiving sensitive and exclusive investment opportunities marked super confidential. In February 2025, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer visited Palantir in Washington, along with then Ambassador Peter Mandelson. The visit was set up by the embassy, and there is no record of what was discussed. Palantir has been a key big tech player in Israel's genocide in Gaza, providing the Israeli military with advanced AI tools to facilitate the deaths of Palestinians. So then we've got, Thiel through Palantir connected to Israel, and then we have, all sorts of other Israeli connections we're just going to go on and see. Now, Palantir reported a 1.5 billion in losses from 2020 to 2024. That allowed them to pay $0 in federal income taxes. So how did they spend 64 million on stock buybacks and pay their CEO 3.3 billion over roughly the same period? The tax code is a complete joke. So, things need to be looked into with regard to Palantir. As Mike Benz says, I'm utterly blown away by this new audio of the Epstein files. And he's got a 10-minute audio here. Well, obviously not going to play that. It shows a secret conversation you fear every high-level government official might have with an outside fixer to hook them up the moment they leave government to enter the private sector. Here, Jeffrey Epstein teaches Ehud Barak, while he was still Minister of Defense in Israel, but on his way out, how to make millions of dollars in the private sector by first compiling a list of people who owe him favors, or that you've got kompromat over, from his 40 years in government service. Epstein then told Ehud Barak to pursue Peter Thiel, whose name is that at that point Ehud Barak did not even know how to spell, and to try to connect with a company called Palantir, which existence Ehud Barak had never heard of, and whose name Jeffrey Epstein didn't know how to spell. So this is all going on. It's the connecting of these really big big names in international politics and international business and international this and that, which takes me on to Steve Bannon, right? So Steve Bannon, who was the brains behind Trump 1.0, was eventually kicked out, but is still the brains, I think, behind much of Trump 2.0. The, fire hose of scandal that is happening on a daily basis, the rate of fire of what the Trump administration is doing, the muzzle velocity, as Bannon called it, is a Bannon thing, right? Bannon is big time in the Epstein files. Here he is just the other day speaking. I wonder who this is. It's not only George Sim. It just happens to be George Simeon, right? The leader of Romania's far-right AUR party, a known Russian agent who is currently banned from entering the territory of several European countries, being interviewed by Steve Bannon, a man who is mentioned in his Epstein files, that his mentions are only second to Trump and Epstein himself. So the Epstein files, most common name is Trump, except we don't see most of those because they are not, unfortunately, published. But after that, it's Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is huge. As Marvin Bauman says, time to ban Bannon from Europe and sanction him. We can't tolerate Russian agents anymore. I actually think that should happen. I think Steve Bannon should never be allowed to set foot in the EU again, because he has campaigned. He is essentially an espionage agent against the EU, on behalf of whom I don't know. Russia, maybe. He wants all the right wing, far right. What's the name of the Bannon's political movement in Europe? He started up this political movement. What's it called? It's called The Movement. Okay. So sorry, so The Movement, right-wing populist group. So The Movement is a Brussels-based organization founded by American political strategist Steve Bannon to promote right-wing populist and economic nationalist groups in Europe that are opposed to the European Union governments and political structures of Europe. Steve Bannon is anti-Europe. He's anti the EU, and he wants the far right to rise up and destroy the EU. Like, that's not controversial, as in it's not some kind of, do you think? No, it's out there. He will tell you that that's what he's doing. Like, this guy is dangerous for Europe. And so he is one that has wanted to connect all of these people. Viktor Orban, Matteo Salvini, now the deputy prime minister in Italy, part of this network, Thierry Baudet. You've got Marine Le Pen, of course, Nigel Farage, Luigi Di Maio, the leader of the Five Star Movement in Italy. And then a lot in Italy, actually, Brothers of Italy, which is Giorgia Meloni's group, but they seem to be a little bit more sensible. And then, Jair Bolsonaro as well, so on and so forth. So AFD, all of that. So Steve Bannon is a real challenge, right? And here he is now interviewing the far-right leader, George Simeon from Romania. It's worth understanding, this is Derek Taylor saying, George Simeon, leader of Romania's pro-Russian far-right AUR party, is now suing a US lobbying firm for $4.5 million after it failed to arrange a meeting with Trump or JD Vance, and is now flatly refusing to give Simeon back the money he paid for the said meeting. But again, it makes you understand how much money is associated with politics at the elite level, with people paying people to get to meet other people. And it's just money changing hands with money. Trump, how much money is Trump getting for people paying to meet him and to have a say through these different, this guy pays a lobbying firm, the lobbying firm pays Trump, Trump gets money for seeing this guy. And so the networks go on and on and on. But Steve Bannon, turns out it's worse than you thought. He's a flat-out traitor, says Claude Taylor. Peter Jukes from the Byline Times says, and Bannon wasn't just being advised and enabled by Epstein. He was working as a strategic advisor to Ehud Barak, another one of Epstein's dudes, who had direct meetings with Putin. And here we have Steve Bannon. We are set for Noam, so that's going to be Noam Chomsky on Saturday. Have you told him what we are preparing for? No, he could be on board, correct? Or should I ask? Easy for me. Ask. And yes, I could, of course. I'm dealing with Ehud Barak in Israel, making me crazy. Ehud, massive. Can we announce I'm his strategic advisor? This will be a long campaign. Elections in September. 17th. Lots to talk about. This is a brilliant move, blah, blah, blah. Just like, you know, this guy is involved in just doing all of these kind of, well, as you can see there, meeting with others. In fact, that is Noam Chomsky and Woody Allen and Jeffrey Epstein there meeting about something. Just Bannon is at the heart of it with Peter Thiel. The messages between these two men should be read aloud to Americans. Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein were engineering what they hoped would be a global nationalist takeover, right? And that's what I'm kind of talking about here. So let's move into what's going on above the sex scandal to the global political agenda that is using the sex scandal to get its agenda fulfilled, or at least the agenda for other people. You know, it might not be that Jeffrey Epstein was the guy that was thinking up all these things, but Steve Bannon was that guy, and Jeffrey Epstein is a guy that is facilitating Steve Bannon being able to do all of these things. Here are photos with Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein. Bannon was in touch with Epstein long after the latter's first conviction. Here also is Farage thanking Bannon for his help in winning the Brexit referendum, and Farage deferentially listening to Bannon as the latter outlines his political project. And that is,
if you're
again,
interested,
like my position is that the right in the UK, as in the reform right, are implicated in all of this.
what I'd like to do is set up something, and I'll fund it somehow. That I think you're the perfect guy. We help knit together this populist nationalist movement throughout the world. Because guys in Egypt are coming to me, the Modi's guys in India, Duterte, you know, and we get Orban and even thing, and we're somehow some sort of convening authority for conferences and stuff like that, so we can get ideas out there. I mean, do you think that's a worthwhile thing?
Yeah,
or nobody's got it. Nobody's doing it right now.
It's not being done.
The reason we're going to beat Corbyn and Sanders is they're not prepared to take on the powers that be. We're fire breathers. I mean, we're taking on the establishment every day. You've taken on the Tory party. I'm taking on the Republican Party. They don't have that, and that's why we can steal a march in them. And the reason they don't want to do it, it's immigration. As long as they don't take on the they just refuse to take on the immigration. We're prepared.
This is honestly one of the most revealing clips of all time, which is let's use immigration to deliver the far right into power. And then we've got a far right around the world. And he's not just talking about Europe. He's Modi. He's talking about Duterte in the Philippines at the time. No doubt Bolsonaro at the time in Brazil. Just incredible.
Yes. It's a global revolt. It's a zeitgeist.
It's a global
right
revolt.
History, but it's going to need the motive power. And the thing that's missing is that's what I'm really trying to put together now is the ideas. The ideas have to come in more sharp focus. The economic ideas, the political ideas.
You've also moved, Steve, into a different place.
Yeah.
The minute you stood up on that stage in Alabama, you became a different figure.
Yeah.
You're in a different place now. You're not just fixing stuff and operating behind the scenes and making it happen.
Yeah.
You're now the face of it.
Well done, Bannon. Well done, Breitbart. You helped with this hugely. And then
That's Brexit. Well done, Bannon. Well done, Breitbart. So, like the idea that Brexit was just about a bunch of British people voting on their futures. There were things moving behind the scenes. There were strings being pulled. And Steve Bannon was at the heart of it. Here, Brexit Shambles says the significance of Bannon. So one of the controversies of Brexit was, and indeed the 2016 presidential elections in the United States, was Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica was this company that basically manipulated data from Facebook in order to manipulate, or not manipulate, they took the data and then used that for advertisers or for political parties to be able to manipulate voters on Facebook. So they'd say, right, for the Republican Party or for Brexit, say, right, looking at so we're going to get this all of this information from Meta, from Mark Zuckerberg. We're going to take this Facebook data, and then we're going to look at who this person is. And it turns out that we now know from looking at this person's likes that if we create adverts in this way, that these guys are going to be really susceptible to be swayed to vote in the way that we want them, because we're pulling the strings, because we know all the data from Facebook. And then they got into loads of trouble. Cambridge Analytica was all this, the whole controversy with, you know, both in the UK and in the US. You had committee hearings about Cambridge Analytica, but who was at the heart of it? Steve Bannon. The significance of Bannon being the vice president and director of Cambridge Analytica LLC should never be forgotten, nor should the excruciating discomfort Cambridge Analytica CEO Alexander Nix exhibited in Parliament during the investigation into the catastrophic heist.
I want to invite you to see if you can remember a question that I put to you at the last evidence session, where you gave evidence, which was concerning a £24.2 million payment from Delaware registered Cambridge Analytica, the American Cambridge Analytica, to the UK registered SCL elections. Do you remember we had a conversation about that?
Yes, I do.
And I think at the time you weren't willing to let me know what the payment was for. Can you let me know what the payment was for now?
Again, I can't see, unless you can help me understand the relevance of that to the committee. I can't see how that is important.
Well, let me see if I can help you understand the relevance, because under the terms of the bankruptcy that you filed in the state of New York, a statement of financial affairs has been published, and the documents are available. And it looks from the analysis that Cambridge Analytica has no costs associated with the revenue it receives and manages, and manages to transfer more money to SCL elections than it declares that it generates. So, for example, in 2016, Cambridge Analytica had a gross revenue of $25,299,213. But according to Companies House, under a related party transaction disclosure, SCL elections received income from Cambridge Analytica of £24.2 million, or in dollars, $34 million.
Right.
So there seems to be some money transfers going on between the two companies. And I'm keen to know whether that's work that is being undertaken between the two companies, or whether it's a way of using finance to distribute finance from one side of the Atlantic to the other.
No, it reflects the relationship between the two companies and the work that was going on between them.
What kind of work?
And unfortunately, we don't hear the rest of that in this clip. But the idea is that Cambridge Analytica only generates this amount of money, and yet it paid its British entity more money than it ever generates. So where's that money coming from? We have a way of money going across the Atlantic using a Steve Bannon entity, going across the Atlantic, ending up in an entity in the UK whose job was to influence the Brexit election. Just like this kind of stuff is going on, and it's just absolutely freaking staggering. Epstein, Bannon, Thiel, Trump, Farage, Putin. Was it a deliberate collapse of international order, a push for untraceable finance, or a Russian operation? They were all mutually beneficial, but my money's on Putin as a puppet master. It's time for a full independent investigation. I don't know who's at the top of this. I think Bannon is at the top using Russia, and Russia is using Bannon. They're all using each other because all of their goals are aligned, which is the destruction of the European Union. It is a destruction of left-wing or centrist politics in any country that they're involved in. So they want a GOP, and they want a GOP to then become MAGA, and they want MAGA to become authoritarian. It's exactly like what is happening in the United States right now is part of what's Bannon is his wet dream. It's like all he's ever dreamed about is happening in the United States at the moment. Bannon talked the other day about, again, not for the first time, about ICE agents patrolling ballots, like election voting stations in the United States. So you're sliding into authoritarianism, and Bannon is there for it. And there are all these connections that go through Epstein. So here we've got this is Steve Bannon. I'm now an advisor to Front, Salvini, the League, So that front is National Front, Front National in France, which has now become Rassemblement National. So I presume that is National Front in Front National in France, Salvini in the League in Italy, AFD in Germany, Swiss Peoples in Switzerland, Orban, so Hungary, Fidesz, Land and Freedom, which is that FPO in Austria? I don't know. And Farage in the UK. Next May is the European Parliament elections. We can go from 92 seats to 200, shut down any crypto legislation or anything else we want. So now we start understanding that crypto's got something to do with this. And then you're thinking, well, World Liberty Foundation, crypto, Trump's son, Eric Trump with Steve Witkoff's son. You're joining even more dots. But Bannon here is saying, I'm advisor to all these right-wing parties, and it's like we can go. He's talking about the far-right coalition in the European Parliament as we. He is part of it, the movement. We can go from 92 seats to 200. And of course, they've been moving in that direction for years now, and they are using immigration in order to do that. This is absolutely incredible. Epstein, Farage, Boris Johnson, and Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg, big Tory leaver. Is it Epstein who wrote these messages or Bannon? Is the question asked. Actually, I didn't show you the rest of some of these messages, actually. This is the one we saw before. Brexit is just the beginning. What else? Putin in Vienna. Your guy setting up and hosting. So again, Putin associated with these guys. This is Steve Bannon to Jeffrey Epstein. Putin in Vienna, your guy is setting up and hosting. So Jeffrey Epstein's guy is setting up Putin in Vienna. Good work, says Jeffrey Epstein. It begins. Just absolutely incredible. Okay, we're going to come on to what Russia in a second more formally. So Epstein, Farage, Boris Johnson, Rees-Mogg. Is it Epstein who wrote these messages or Bannon? Hey, I've gotten pulled into the Brexit thing this morning with Nigel, Boris, and Rees-Mogg. Can I take a rain check on Fiat Guy until I return? So that looks like that was Bannon, possibly the sender self. So actually, no, we don't know the sender there, but I think it's sent to Jeffrey Epstein. Now unlikely as UK is heating up. He's staying at the request of Boris Johnson, you can surmise. So now Boris Johnson seems to be involved with Steve Bannon and this kind of Brexit movement. Steve Bannon was working very closely with Viktor Orban, trying to lift him and others onto the world stage. Says he was an advisor to National Front, all those that we've just seen. So it's all of this kind of European involvement here. Kurt's important, as he will host Trump and Putin. Tried. Dear Sebastian, Steve Bannon, who behind the scenes still is one of the most insightful and influential players in Washington and very close to the president, would like to see you on various issues. He is now working very closely with Viktor Orban and other of his colleagues in Europe. I am having dinner with him in Paris on June the 22nd. He could come to Vienna anytime between the 23rd and 28th of that month. He is very astute and extremely well-informed analyst and player. Though we have significantly different views on some issues, I will strongly recommend that you see him, and I'm sure you'll find it very useful. Warmest Terje. Is that the Norwegian guy? You might add that if he's in Paris, he is welcome to join for dinner, up to you, whoever he's talking to, but that's been closed off there. So, trying to lift Abe onto the world stage as key to Bolsonaro, Orban, Salvini. Is that Abe? Is that Japanese leader? This is what this guy, his guys want, and that's why I included it. It's just incredible, the string pulling going on between these people, and Steve Bannon is really at the heart of it, and more and more. So, what's going on here? So I haven't read this one. Why did the French authorities never arrest Epstein? Macron should after him, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'll have to read that one. I don't have time to read that now. Okay, so here we have the German AFD. So then it's really interesting. So the AFD in Germany, also part of this kind of world. Putin's party in Germany, supported by Elon Musk, is disgusting, inhuman scum, says Jürgen Naudet, the journalist. This is the AFD politician quoted verbatim. Quote, I don't care if billionaires have sex with underage children on private jets. So this is that cognitive dissonance reduction that you're doing. So like, not if you asked this person, Julian Adrat, if you asked them 5 years ago, do you think it's bad that billionaires have sex with underage children, right? And or children or underage girls, however you want to phrase it. I'm sure that out of any context of this, he'd be like, that's disgusting. And then now it involves Epstein and the AFD and all of these different groups, and Peter Thiel's at the heart of it, and Steve Bannon. Now, oh, I don't care if billionaires have sex with underage children on private jets. Wow, that is right there. I assume cognitive dissonance reduction. I'm just jettisoning off this contrary evidence to my position that I'm, morally great or AFD's right or whatever it is. We're now involved with Epstein. Oh, I don't care about that. I don't care if billionaires have sex with pedophile sex. Don't care about it. Okay, fair enough. Wow. And yeah, so Timothy Ash now saying, and this is fairly forthright, he's an economist covering emerging Europe and Middle East, blah, 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 Russia. He quite often comments on Russia. Timothy Ash says, I have no doubt that Epstein, MAGA, Brexit, AFD, Front National, Reform are all Russian intelligence projects. And that's where we're going to go to next. But it's worth noting that Mark Elias here saying Steve Bannon said Tuesday that federal government is planning to send immigration, customs or enforcement ICE officers to patrol polling stations during this year's midterm elections. So Steve Bannon and the MAGA movement is seeing the United States become more authoritarian, and that could be the end of the free and fair elections in the midterms there. So what we have, and we're going to move on to Russia. Breaking from Poland yesterday, the Polish government has appointed a special analytical team that will investigate this matter, said Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. There are signs that Epstein was connected to the Russian intelligence. In fact, we can go into some more detail here. It's very likely that this was a planned operation by the Russian KGB. More and more leads are pointing to suspicions that this unprecedented paedophilia scandal was co-organized by Russian intelligence services. There are over 1,000 documents directly concerning Vladimir Putin in the documents published so far, 9,000 concerning Moscow. I'm talking about the Russian political environment. The FBI claims that it had information that Mr. Epstein managed part of Vladimir Putin's assets. More and more commentators and experts assume that it is very likely that this was a planned operation by the Russian KGB, the so-called honey trap, a sweet lure, a trap set for the elites of the Western world, mainly the United States. Also, according to the Times, Epstein had been planning meetings with Putin several times. Christopher Steele, a former head of MI6's Russia desk, said, quote, my understanding from my American sources is that as early as the 1970s, Epstein was effectively involved with Russian organized crime in Brighton Beach in New York, and through them with the Russian mission in New York, and was almost certainly recruited by them at that time. Right. So now we have much more formal connections between Russia and Epstein. This source says, I can't believe I'm right again. It was a Russian op. It doesn't mean he was SVR or KGB. He knew 5 CIA directors, was a fan of Dugin, obsessed with Putin. Barbie and myself spent 250 hours when things first came out last year. I know it from the moment I saw he went with the Russian ambassador to Cuba, then Ireland together. And then he talks about what the Polish Prime Minister said. So there's a general idea that Epstein and Russia are very, very connected. This source says staggering evidence shows who put Trump into power. Evidence shows Putin has owned Trump long before 2016. Jeffrey Epstein had an audience with Putin after his 2008 conviction and ran an operation on behalf of the KGB and lured wealthy men to Epstein's New York and Florida mansions and right into a honey trap. These men were filmed having sex with underage girls, and Putin leveraged that evidence against these wealthy men. So we know that Trump was mixing with Epstein. Epstein has said that they were best friends, right? There's no way you can be best friends with someone that runs this kind of sex ring without knowing what they do. And then Epstein saying he's the worst man in the world. He's the baddest man I know. And then you've got all these accusations that are now coming out from both the tip lines, but other you know, the FBI have investigated, they've interviewed people who have claimed that Trump has done X, Y, and Z to them. So I would suggest that there's a very high likelihood that Trump was involved in some way with the sex trafficking that Epstein was doing. And the idea here is that then that is a leverage that Putin has over Trump, because Epstein has connections to Putin. In exchange, Epstein received large amounts of Russian money to be laundered in the US. So this could then go back to what Goose was saying earlier, which was, from a media point of view, the lack of curiosity about how Epstein went from teacher to billionaire financier is notable. Well, did it come from Russia? My guess is that the money was laundered through Trump properties, dispelling the any myth that Trump broke away from Epstein. Trump was selling properties sold to Russians at 1.5 to 2 times the market rate at some point. When the Trump boys said we don't need American banks because they get plenty of money from Russia, they weren't kidding. Epstein, working for Putin, knew how best to handle Trump. And when Epstein was killed, my bet it was on the orders from Putin rather than Trump. Everything you see happening today has been ordered by Putin, if this research is correct. It also means that we most likely have any more state secrets. So, you know, take that all with a pinch of salt. But there is a lot of evidence to suggest that Russia are heavily involved in Epstein and with Trump. I mean, what else explains why Trump? What explains better why Trump is just continually capitulating to Russia? Every time he stands strong, then he just comes out and capitulates after a phone call with Putin, where Putin probably just drops in a couple of keywords that Trump knows means that, oh, you know, if you're going to do this, Trump, you know that I'm going to release this. FBI informant called Epstein the manager of Putin's wealth. Wow. So here, Jeffrey Epstein had a compound in New Mexico where he lured and video recorded underage women. He also had a private island. Epstein was the President Vladimir Putin's wealth manager and provided the same service for Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. Epstein had some connection to someone redacted from MIT Media Lab, but CHS was unsure of the details. Epstein had dirt on other people. The logs from his flights were made public at some point. Epstein had a mansion in the Upper West Side, blah, 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 blah. So this is reporting from, I presume, FBI there, that he was seen as a wealth manager of Vladimir Putin. Dave Troy says, it's time to say this clearly, as you can see it with your own two eyes, finally. Epstein was interacting first and foremost with Russia-aligned interests and was touching nearly every active measures and disinformation agent that has rolled Western democracies. He is not plotting with Israeli handlers. He is coordinating with Putin, FSB agents and their collaborators in the US and elsewhere, including Ehud Barak. What people don't understand is the relationship between Russia and Israel, which is long and complex. For decades, Russia has sought leverage and control in the Levant region. The KGB backed Yasser Arafat and fueled Palestinian conflict as a leverage mechanism. Robert Maxwell, so that's Ghislaine Maxwell's father, who was a Jew who escaped after the Second World War, set up in the UK, and then started the Daily Mirror, became this kind of prior to Rupert Murdoch, it was Robert Maxwell, and he is Ghislaine Maxwell's father. So then you've got he was thought to have connections to Mossad and to the Israeli. He was ended up being, was it buried? Although they didn't find his body. So he supposedly committed suicide at sea, but he didn't. Obviously, you don't, like, when you're a super rich oligarch, you don't like sail out to sea and then fall off your yacht, never to be seen again. So, like, no one's sure how he died, but pretty sure it's some kind of assassination, right? Then he was I think he was buried in, or he wasn't buried. There was some kind of service, I guess, metaphorical burial in Israel, I believe. So there were these connections with Ghislaine Maxwell to Israel, or Ghislaine Maxwell's Robert Maxwell, the father, who was himself a kind of oligarch. Robert Maxwell was involved in emigration of Soviet Jews into Israel. The Lubavitcher cult, founded in Russia, over time became a mechanism for Putin to project power into Israel and into the global Jewish diaspora. Netanyahu was benefited greatly from the Lubavitcher network. Ivanka and Jared are devotees, as is Charles Kushner. But Israel has many factions. Many dislike what Lubavitch has become. So that's to look at. I mean, it's a fascinating cult, by the way, the Lubavitch movement. I wrote about it in one of my books, actually, because of. Was it? No. It might have been to do when I was writing about cognitive dissonance. Actually, I think there was a really good case study, but I can't quite remember. Anyway, I should know. I wrote about it in my book on the resurrection. So you got the Kushners then involved here. And remember, it's thought that Vladimir Putin went to Israel to receive cancer treatment. So for those who believe that Putin has for a long time been quite ill, the real Putin, or one of the Putins, it is thought that he's received the world's best cancer treatment in Israel, and that's why partly why there could be this closer relationship with Israel, between Israel and Russia than many people might think. Anyway, Russia-aligned propagandists Whitney Webb, Grey Zone, Dropsite have focused on Epstein's Israel connections, which exist but are in isolation inscrutable, to the exclusion of all else, downplaying the Russian alignment. The truth is that Epstein was working to overthrow the Western financial system with Bannon, long a Russian goal. He was working with FSB connected people, Belyakov, Drakova. He helped seed and steer Bitcoin and Tether. He even planted the seeds of QAnon with 4chan and /poll. He didn't, don't know if that's a Reddit or something, but he didn't count on Israel to do this. He worked with people connected to Moscow. Another tale, reports using generic terms like Israel or Mossad without naming individuals. Israel is not a monolith. It is comprised of factions. If reports don't mention specific individuals, they're making things up. The KGB settled on anti-Semitism decades ago. It's a very specific kind of disinformation strategy. Why? Because it works, partly because of the success of their previous success with the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. KGB brain Philip Bobkov specialized in it, and his work echoes today. This can all be true while objecting the current Israeli regime, the way it's conducting itself. It's not a choice, contrary to the propagandist view. Indeed, clear-eyed views of history require observing all manner of facts. But when it comes to Epstein, he was partly a free agent, networking and coming up with his own schemes. He was working with Russia to create new financial systems. He had hooks into Israeli networks, which helped him execute his designs. And he was importing and abusing women to fulfill his appetites and to feed his network. He wasn't working for the Mossad or the CIA, though certain affiliated people and networks may have aided and abetted him. Subtract out the overt anti-Semitism and KGB misdirection, look at these emails fresh, and much clearer picture emerges of someone very much at the center of a large networked influence campaign. Primarily, it does not have America's best interests at heart. First and foremost, Epstein was a traitor. He's now dead, but many of his collaborators survive. Bring them to justice. So I think that's a fascinating thread, and I think he's much more likely going at this, or he was when he was alive, with the FSB than with any other entity in a direct fashion. But I think much of what he did aligned with all of those organizations, and there might have been sort of crossover. But yeah, absolutely fascinating. 3 million pages, says the Euromaidan Press, of Epstein's files have just dropped, and they read like Russian intelligence. Sanctioned banks, FSB contacts, Europe's human rights chief passing his messages to Putin. These are some details. Poland may open a formal investigation into the matter. But anyway, we have the Euromaidan Press here going into a lot of detail concerning the honey trap empire. Epstein files revealed deep ties to Belarusian and Russian individuals, including an FSB-trained business advisor. So the connections don't prove Epstein was directed by Russian intelligence, but they fit a pattern that officials on NATO's eastern flank find deeply troubling, and that pattern has a name: kompromat. The full Epstein files archive is available, obviously, at well, it's not the full archive, actually, let's face it. How the KGB industrialized sexual blackmail. To understand why analysts find the Epstein files troubling, it helps to know what Russian intelligence has done before. Russia didn't invent sexual blackmail, but it industrialized it. Soviet security services adopted an espionage technique called a honey trap. The intelligence professionals define as luring targets into intimate encounters, secretly recording their interactions and using the material for blackmail. The KGB refined this into an art form, training female agents called swallows to seduce foreign targets. They lured diplomats into bug departments known as swallows' nests. Hidden cameras record everything. Targets include British clerk John Vassell and French ambassador Maurice de Dijon. both compromised during the Cold War. The system survived the Soviet collapse. In 1999, footage of Prosecutor General Yuri Skuratov with prostitutes aired on Russian state TV. Skuratov had been investigating Kremlin corruption. Putin, then FSB head, publicly authenticated the tape. The investigation died. Putin had proven his loyalty. Quote, the fact of the matter is most people have a file, James Nixie of Chatham House told CNN. Most people who have been to Russia of any commercial or political significance have a dossier screwed away on them. The Epstein files suggest that the playbook went international. Of course, then you can look at Trump's visits to Moscow previously. That Steele dossier from Christopher Steele I still think that is entirely a probable thing. That it's been dismissed by Trump and others, but it's the sort of thing that Russia would definitely do. Cold War era, Epstein era. So Cold War tactics versus Epstein operation. So instead of the swallows, you've got private island jets and properties. Instead of one target at a time, simultaneous compromise. You have these big parties. Agent operatives are trafficking survivors. Embassy officials are now the global elite, and that's who Epstein was interested in. Russian banks, Kremlin access, and a system of procurement, the 4 dimensions of Epstein's operation. So very quickly go through the headlines here. Financial infrastructure through sanctioned Russian banks. JP Morgan's suspicious activity reports unsealed in October 2025 show Epstein maintained accounts linked to Russian banks Alpha Bank and Sberbank, both now under Western sanctions. Senator Ron Wyden revealed on 17th of July that Treasury's Epstein file documents 4,725 wire transfers totaling nearly $1.1 billion from a single account, with, quote, multiple Russian banks which are now under sanctions processing payments related to sex trafficking. Many victims came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and Turkmenistan, countries where trafficking networks operate with impunity. So the amount of money swapping hands is scary. 2, systematic procurement of women for Western elites. The files documenting a trafficking pipeline. In August 2010, Epstein offered Prince Andrew dinner with a woman he described as 26, Russian, clever, beautiful, trustworthy. Andrew replied he would be delighted to see her. In 2012, someone emailed Epstein, I have 2 Russian girls for you to meet, one 21, another 24. In 2013, NFL team co-owner Steve Tisch discussed Ukrainian and Russian girls he had met through the financier. Emails show Epstein describing one woman as civilian but Russian and rarely tells the full truth but fun. The women had names, hometowns, families, but in the files they appear as commodities moved across borders for other people's purposes. And of course, it's likely that Russia might have some kompromat on those particular ones, right? The Belarus connection. Beyond Moscow, one thread leads to Minsk. Karina Shuliak, Epstein's final girlfriend, arrived from Belarus in 2009. According to the Bureau of Prisons records obtained by the New York Times, she received his last phone call before his death, an unmonitored 15-minute call from his jail cell. He told guards he was calling his mother, who had been dead since 2004. His will, signed 2 days before he died, bequeathed her $50 million, 5 times more than Ghislaine Maxwell's $10 million, plus a 32.73 carat diamond ring and his entire property portfolio. The DOJ files reveal wire transfers to an address in Minsk, where, according to online directories reviewed by Belarusian outlet Zerkalo, a person with the surname Shuliak resided. Epstein paid for her mother's medical treatment and funded her home for her parents. Shuliak worked for Southern Trust Company, Epstein's US Virgin Islands entity, processed $184 million between 2013 and 19. Court filings describe Southern Trust as a conduit for payments for young foreign women. Follow the money. Southern Trust Company, Jeffrey Epstein, Karina Shuliak, the Shuliak family, just an awful lot of money. FSB officer who helped Epstein evade sanctions. In August 2025, months before the DOJ release, the dossier center, an investigative unit run by exiled Russian oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky, uncovered Epstein's relationship with Sergei Belyakov, a graduate of the FSB Academy in Moscow. Their correspondence dates to at least 2014, when Western sanctions following Russia's annexation of Crimea created mutual interest. Belyakov's career trajectory is telling. After graduating from the FSB Academy in 98, he became an advisor to oligarch Deripaska and then Deputy Minister of Economic Development by 2012. Now, remember, Deripaska was involved with Manafort. Manafort was Trump's campaign manager. Manafort went down for that, for his connections to Russia and blah, 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 and tax and all sorts of fraud. And then he was pardoned by Trump later by Trump. So, oh my goodness, all of these connections. He ran the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin's Davos. The files show Belyakov helped Epstein handle a Russian model who was blackmailing American businessmen. Epstein emailed Belyakov on the 24th of July 2015. There is a Russian girl from Moscow, Guzel Ganieva. She is attempting to blackmail a group of powerful businessmen in New York. It is bad for business for everyone involved. Within 72 hours, Belyakov provided a detailed intelligence profile, her seasonal earnings, over 100,000, her methods and her vulnerabilities. Ganieva later publicly accused Epstein's friend Leon Black of sexual harassment and abuse, so on and so forth. I mean, there's more, there's more here, connecting Epstein to Russia, to Belarus, and the network, so on and so forth. And then you've got Jagland as well. So you've got, as I talked about the other day, the Norwegian Prime Minister from 2008, 2009, I think it was. Then he was working in the European Union, but he's basically pro-Russian, and he features in the files an awful lot. And then kompromat and so on and so forth. Really fascinating article there. So Alex Taylor says the next piece of the Epstein-Moscow kompromat Trump jigsaw slots into place with Polish Prime Minister saying that this afternoon that Epstein was probably a Russian spy. That is something I can't wait to find what they find out there. But of course, the connections with Bannon and all these others go to Le Pen, with Marine Le Pen. So her father was an outright fascist, Jean-Marie Le Pen. He started the National Front, or Front National. She then tried to make it sound a little bit more reasonable and not so unelectable. So she turned it into Rassemblement National, but she was struggling to get money. No one was lending to her because she was a far right, and then she got her money from Russia, right? In Le Pen's National Front in 2014 took Russian loans worth 11 million euros. One of the loans for 9 million came from a small bank, the first Czech Russian bank, with links to the Kremlin. What Epstein files suggest is a well-known fact. Epstein files suggest that Le Pen and France's National Front are largely propped up by Russian money. Now, we already knew this, but it is then confirmed in the Epstein files. So again, you've got the connection of the far right in Europe, but then also the Russia connection, and then Steve Bannon connection, and the Peter Thiel connection. So far right Le Pen family implicated as Russian-funded assets in recently released Epstein files. We've got Sean Hannity being mentioned as well. So who knew? Sean Hannity, National Front. So I saw SB in London yesterday, Steve Bannon yesterday, and he seemed especially paranoid about any reporters seeing me with him. My guess is that he is working hard on his relationship with Trump, who he sees as newly ascendant, and being seen with me might queer that. He went on, this is Jeffrey Epstein, he went on Sean Hannity last night and will be on Piers Morgan tomorrow. And that seemed with an eye towards the audience of one, i.e. for Trump. He was having a meeting yesterday with the French right-wingers, including Le Pen's husband, about refinancing the National Front Party, because apparently a good part of that money comes from Russia, of their money comes from Russia. Two thoughts here. These guys seem like idiots, pure Ruritania, and Bannon, surrounded by his own thuggish-looking security people and wacky bloggers advisors, thrives precisely because the world of populism is so unprofessional, if not farcical. So it's interesting from Jeffrey Epstein, who you wouldn't have thought is particularly a far-right kind of guy, or even a right-wing kind of guy. I think he's a me kind of guy. But saying there that actually Steve Bannon looks a bit... sorry, am I not showing that to you? Looks a bit thuggish and unprofessional. He does do that, Steve Bannon. So anyway, interesting stuff there in that Epstein release. Right, then we're going to go on to the final part here, which is then the UK and Peter Mandelson. So people at the moment are fixating, as earlier we heard from sort of from Goose Springsteen, fixating on Mandelson, but actually I don't think that is where we should be fixating. But I'm not saying that just because I'm more supportive of this government than, say, a Tory government. I think Mandelson is a bad human. I've never liked Mandelson. I, like many that we're just about to see, thought he was, not knowing any of his connections to Epstein. I never knew he was connected to Epstein at all. But when he was appointed ambassador to the US, I thought that was canny. I don't particularly like him. He was known back in the day when he was a Labour MP, then became a Labour bigwig, a grandee, became a lord, but he was sacked twice. He was always controversial, Peter Mandelson, always controversial. He was sacked twice, I think I'm right in saying, in the Labour government in the previous one that finished in what, 2010, was it? 1997, 2010? Was it 2008? I always forget. Anyway, so Mandelson was always a little bit controversial, but he was known as a Prince of Darkness because he was seen as this dark, kind of not a decent human, like type thing, like you would normally associate with the left, like looking out for the poor or the welfare state or stuff like this. He was more about connections, and he was this nefarious, or almost like vampiric figure that sat behind, a bit like Steve Bannon in a way, Stephen Miller in a way, sat behind Tony Blair. So that's the sort of person he was. But that was why I thought he was a good appointment as ambassador, because he was, and apparently it was working. Like he was doing a good job of being that kind of guy that you would need to work with Donald Trump. Yeah. But also he had connections to Russia, I believe, as well. And he didn't divest his investments or something that were connected to Russia until after the start of, or after 2022. And so he's not a good guy, but he is kind of at the heart of the scandal at the moment in the UK, and everyone's fixating on him because he is a big Labour Party grandee. But when you look at pictures like this, you've got Nick Candy, who's the Reform Party treasurer here, and you've got Nigel Farage laughing heartily at Peter Mandelson. You understand kind of who Peter Mandelson kind of was. As Reform UK want all the attention to be about Peter Mandelson, maybe we need to be asking if Nigel Farage is withholding information from us. Here he is with Mandelson and Reform UK Treasurer Nick Candy. All three are in the Epstein files. Okay, so the National here, Scottish newspaper, says Reform UK Treasurer Nick Candy named in dozens of Epstein files. We're going to look at Nick Candy a little bit later. But there is controversy outside of Peter Mandelson in the UK, but everyone is focusing on Mandelson. Reform Treasurer Nick Candy is close to Peter Mandelson, is a claim here. They're both in the Epstein files. It's a small world, and this is the key. Run by elites for elites. This is, I think, the theme to this video, if it's anything, is it's a small world run by elites for elites. And those elites generally also seem to favour far-right authoritarian governments. That's kind of my takeaway from all of this. Now, so Peter Mandelson has now he's been relieved of his ambassadorship. He's now left the Lords himself, and this has been a club to hit Keir Starmer with. So people like Goose Springsteen are saying, well, Starmer should resign. You've had Labour politicians come out and saying he should resign because the Labour Party is split between the left-wingers and the centrists. Keir Starmer's on the centre, so the people on the left are like, Keir Starmer needs to go. My opinion is that'd be the worst thing. Like, we do not need our Prime Minister to go, and he shouldn't go. Like, he made a poor judgment in appointing this guy as ambassador, but he came out today in the speech that you see there in red. He came out and really overtly apologised, and it was actually a pretty good apology as far as these things go. He apologized and said, I'm sorry for this, and I'm sorry for my lapse of judgment, or whatever, however he phrased it. But I was deceived by Peter Mandelson. And so the question is, my view on the whole Peter Mandelson thing is, just really quickly, like, if everyone knew of his connections to Epstein in the way that it turns out he was connected, and the continued connections after 2008 in the way that it now appears, I don't think he would have been put into that position. So look, why is it that our intelligence services either didn't know or weren't feeding that on? Like, there's no way, given what Reform would do and the Tories would do if this came out, it's just such a risk to put someone like Mandelson in that position. So therefore, I think the wool was pulled over at least the Labour, like Starmer's eyes and Morgan McSweeney's eyes, and possibly even the intelligence services. So it appears that and this is what Rory Stewart and Alison Campbell were talking about in the rest of their video, is like, how did this kind of happen? So I think there needs to be a bit of an investigation into this, and it's good that actually Starmer acted really quickly, got rid of him, and then said sorry, and like, there's a really robust response. You might not like that, but basically, if you're not a fan of Labour, you are going to want to see Keir Starmer hung, drawn and quartered. And if you are a fan of Labour, you're going to want to defend him. My position is somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's useful for our country, and I don't think it's fair, considering, like, Nigel Farage had Nathan Gill as a traitor to Russia, as his guy that he's put in charge of Wales, Reform UK Wales, and Nigel Farage keeps going, "Oh, I don't know anything about it." And everyone lets Nigel Farage off. And at the same time, Nigel Farage is saying, "Oh, Starmer should go." And if you're the guy that's saying Starmer should go, then Nigel Farage should go. I'm sorry, if Starmer goes, Farage goes. And if Farage goes, Boris Johnson should have gone even sooner, because he was making Lebedev a lord in the House of Lords, his father was a KGB agent and is a Russian. So, there's so much to be answered here. Anyway, my issue with Mandelson, and where I think the investigation should go, isn't to do with Epstein per se. My issue with Mandelson is this: significant connections to Palantir, including facilitating meetings between the company and UK political leaders, as well as ties to his lobbying firm, Global Counsel, facilitating meetings, lobbying firm ties, government contracts, transparency concerns, public scrutiny. All of that stuff is like, that's what needs to be looked at with regard to Peter Mandelson, and that's what worries me more. I am worried not that someone, it's horrible and I don't like it, and I don't think they should be in that position, i.e. ambassador to the US, if they're involved with Jeffrey Epstein, right? But I don't think it needs any investigation beyond that. It's just like, you're a morally bad person, be gone with you. Where we need investigations is, but if you're organizing contracts with companies that are at the heart of our government, right across every single department, and that Palantir has our data, that's what freaking needs investigating, right? That is where we should be at. So Mandelson, people are fixating on the wrong thing here. They're fixating on Mandelson Epstein rather than Mandelson Peter Thiel Palantir. That's what you need to be worried about. And if anything needs to happen, it needs to happen on that, with regard to, because Peter Mandelson wouldn't have been involved in the sex trafficking thing, right? So it's about the other things. It's about that networking. So anyway, just to give you a sense of what Keir Starmer said.
However well connected, however experienced, however senior, should hold public office if they cannot meet the basic test of honesty. I also want to address the publication of the information Mandelson provided during the appointment process. I understand the strength of public feeling. I share the anger that people feel when powerful individuals appear to escape scrutiny. And I want to be able to release those documents as quickly as possible. I wanted to release them yesterday, in fact, and to talk about them at Prime Minister's questions.
So what he's talking about here is that there is one other area that needs investigating, and that is that Peter Mandelson might have been responsible for some insider trading stuff. So basically, he leaked information from the EU refinancing, was it to do with Greece, and whatever it was, some inside information from EU funding to Epstein. And as we can see with Trump at the moment, with insider trading going absolutely nuts, this happens. Inside knowledge of government activities. We know that pretty much all significant government activities in your home country will affect your stock markets at home. And you can bet on the stock markets, and you can buy and sell and all that stuff. You can make huge amounts of money. And so this is very disturbing that Mandelson let information out of the bag to the United States, to Epstein, and that's the other area that does need investigating.
But the police have advised that releasing certain information now could risk prejudicing a future investigation or legal process. And however frustrating from my personal point of view that is, and it is, I will not take any step, however politically tempting, however popular, that risks justice for victims. Because this is not and must never become a political game. The victims of Epstein have lived with trauma that most of us can barely comprehend. And they've had to relive it again and again. They have seen accountability delayed and too often denied. To them, I want to say this. I am sorry. Sorry for what was done to you. Sorry that so many people with power failed you. Sorry for having believed Mandelson's lies and appointed him. And sorry that even now, you're forced to watch this story unfold in public once again. But I also want to say this. In this country, we will not look away. We will not shrug our shoulders. And we will not allow the powerful to treat justice as optional. We will pursue the truth. We will uphold the integrity of public life. And we will do everything within our power and in the interests of justice to ensure accountability is delivered. That.
Can I just say, right, why I like this speech, by the way, and I've ended up playing it where I wasn't going to. One, he explicitly says, I am sorry. So we don't see enough contrition in public. We've never heard Donald Trump say anything remotely like this. He says, I am sorry. And he also says, I want accountability and integrity. And he talks about the powerful elites. So he's talking about, the powerful not having justice and being able to evade justice. These are exactly the right things we need to be hearing, right? This is kind of what this video is about. Powerful elites getting away with shit, right? And here we've got Keir Starmer saying, we must not allow this to happen. And I'm sorry that it appears to have happened. And I'm sorry for those victims. That's the kind of rhetoric we have never heard from Donald Trump. Donald Trump needs to come out and say this speech. But he can't say that because he doesn't have the integrity of Keir Starmer. Donald Trump is ensconced in the Epstein scandal in a way that Keir Starmer never has been and never will be, right? So when Goose says, hey, JP, I know there'll be a lot to cover, but I think this isn't regarding disclosures about Mandelson has sealed Starmer's fate. He'll be gone by May, if not the end of the month, in my opinion. I think this is about as good a response as you can get. And honestly, if he goes and Trump doesn't, and if he goes and Farage doesn't, if he goes and Boris Johnson didn't go when he did stuff that he wasn't held accountable for, then there's no freaking fairness in the world. There was a lapse of judgment with the appointment of Mandelson, but as he says, that he was deceived.
Is what the public expects. That is what the victims deserve, and it is what I will do.
Now, it's interesting to get an applause for that as well, which means I think it was what certainly his supporters were wanting to hear. But it was a well-delivered, genuine and passionate speech that I think, played well. Now, it's worth also recognizing that when Mandelson was appointed, he was actually given the green light by opposition. So the Times, Michael Gove, who's a big Tory bigwig, he's now in the House of Lords, why Peter Mandelson is the best choice to handle Trump. And this was kind of my view, by the way, as well, because I wasn't so knowledgeable about his connections, or wasn't knowledgeable at all about his connections to Epstein. In a wide-ranging interview, the former Conservative minister reveals his favourite Labour MPs and explains what he found absorbing about the US president. So the Times, they're talking about it. In fact, the Spectator above saying people are forgetting that lots of people came out and supported Mandelson getting a job, and they're the same people that are coming out and slagging off Starmer for appointing Mandelson. It's like you can't have it both ways. The media fawned over the appointment of Mandelson. The same media are now trying to crucify Starmer. Hypocrites, every single one of them. Even the Guardian here. So in the December 2024 column about the appointment, Rawnsley described choice as a gamble that the rewards will justify the risk. So it was a gamble. It was he's not everyone's cup of tea. He highlighted the government's calculation that Mandelson's political savvy and his ability to engage directly with the Trump administration might make him an unusually effective and distinctive ambassador in a challenging political climate. Okay, so that's most of what I want to say about Mandelson, other than Mandelson's links with the US tech firm Palantir must be fully exposed. That's what campaigners are warning. That's what I believe. Palantir is owned by Peter Thiel, who wants democracy abolished and whose money and influence propelled Vance in the White House. Thiel was in close contact with Epstein after the latter's 2008 conviction. Clearly, like Mandelson, Bannon, and many others, he sees nothing wrong with paedophilia. I'm less like his moral evaluations of Epstein, I think are bad, but it doesn't affect the government of the UK. What affects the government of the UK are his links with the US tech firm Palantir, and they must be investigated. Right. So yeah, we need to release all the Mandelson data, but also like lots of people saying, hang on, like for those like Boris Johnson and people in the Conservative Party and the Reform UK Party saying you've got to release all of this. Okay, yeah, but also every hidden link, Lebedev's influence. So the guy that actually owns the Independent newspaper, whose father was a KGB agent, who's a Russian oligarch, who's given a peerage in the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. What's going on there? Right, we need information on that. Owen's privileges, another controversy. Elliot's lobbying, Michael Gove, the Russia report. Why have we not seen a Russia report? The suppressed Brexit assessments and Farage's Russian ties. Transparency shouldn't be selective. I completely agree with that. There's a guy in here, I'm not going to play it to you because we've done enough on Mandelson. There's a guy here that says, actually, when you see how Starmer reacted, and he did the same with Sue Gray, he was really quick, he was really robust, get rid of it. And actually, when previous situations happened like this with the Conservative Party over 14 years of rule, they were very slow on doing anything. You have people involved in all sorts of horrific scandals to do with like sexual abuse and all sorts, and there was not a robust response from the Tories. So there's an interesting point to say that actually, arguably, Starmer has been quicker and more robust with his response to the Mandelson scandal and other scandals, and that actually he's doing a good job of being a decisive leader. That's the other side. Go and listen to that. It's a really interesting interview. But anyway, like I'm kind of with this. The story isn't about Mandelson. That's just a sideshow. It isn't even about Boris Johnson. The UK security services were well aware of their weaknesses. The story is about UK media's refusal to report on Boris Johnson's activities. They all knew, they didn't tell us. There's a lot in the Epstein docs about Boris Johnson overruling our own security services, says this source, RE Russia, and the Russian successful plots to weaken the UK, especially via Brexit. So there needs to be that kind of investigation. Boris Johnson helped a Russian KGB agent's son into our House of Lords, yet there's zero outcry from the BBC. That's Lebedev there in the House of Lords, in his Lord's peerage regalia, and he's essentially a Russian oligarch. Mandelson offered to help Epstein get Russian visa, documents suggest. And I love this. I'm going to play you this. This is on the Jeremy Vine show, and this is Andrea Jenkins, who is a reform mayor now, being put under pressure over the Epstein files by what's her name? Is it Melissa? Marina, I can't remember her second name. Anyway, this is really good.
I mean, the stuff that is alleged about Trump is horrific, and we can't even say it on the air. But I don't know.
But if there's truth in it, that's a different.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
I'm really struggling here. Sorry, I'm really struggling here. I'm going to try and stay calm with this, okay? Because you and your party are very vocal when it comes to protecting women and girls. And here,
the reference is that the grooming gangs up in northern areas, particularly, that involve oftentimes Muslim grooming gangs, or at least that's how it's claimed, although statistically you can argue that. But the idea is that Reform UK are so anti-immigration that they're anti these Muslim grooming gangs, and they're doing it because they want to protect women and children. Then they go and march against these asylum seeker hotels where they're housing asylum seekers because they want to protect the women and children. And yet, so that's the context. That's why she's saying, hey, you're usually so strong on, protecting women and children, right?
Because you and your party are very vocal when it comes to protecting women and girls. And here we are faced with the most cruel, brutal, elite, unpunished grooming gang, paedophile ring in the world. And it is remarkable how quiet you all are. It is remarkable. And also, I need to know, you are a defender of Trump. You praise him, your party, Farage, you align very closely. Do you, I think the viewers should know, given everything we know about Trump, that's in these files that we know of him to date, do you still support him?
Look, this, to me, it's not about Trump. This is about believing in due process. You know,
do you still support him?
I will finish.
Do you?
Marina.
Just ask the question.
I will finish.
We can see through this.
But I mean, I think you do still support him, right? Because as you're saying, he's not guilty in your terms.
I believe in a due process.
Right.
And right, can excuse me, Marina,
right, go for it.
Go. You go for it, Andrea. I'll try.
You're not the host here, Jeremy.
No, it's fine.
Now, the fact is, do I support Trump? He's a democratic leader. Now, if anybody is seen to have been involved, whoever it is, whichever party,
but you want to see people
in
go through
underhand tactics and abuse like that to a minor, then they need outing.
But
excuse me, Marina, I will finish.
The point is, like, she's relying on due process, but yeah, of course I'll be against Trump if due process found him. Yeah, but due process is not taken. That's the point, is that the DOJ is not fulfilling due process criteria.
Andrew, let Marina say her thing. I'll come back to you.
The due process isn't happening because under him, there are still millions of files that haven't been released. I can't believe, in fact, I looked, there is no mention of you ever talking about women and girls unless it's through the lens of immigration. But here, when faced with this guy who's on your side, not a peep. He has been found all.
But what do you think he's done, though?
Forget what's in the files.
So is it worth me even sitting here?
Yes,
if you want to
pretend, worth me even sitting here? Do not get a word in edgeways.
Let me just answer
Marina, wait a
enough, Marina.
All the stuff that we've known today, the civil.
I'm going to if I do not get a chance to speak.
Go for it.
With motor mouth.
Hold. No, she's not. I can control it, but you're both speaking.
I agree.
Your turn,
Definitely.
Andrea.
Ow. Wow. But Marina there was angry, and that's why she was just going at it. It's like, no, there's no due process. And what she was trying to say at the end, even without the Epstein files, you're supporting a guy who's been found by court in New York to be guilty of sexual abuse, and and there's all these other counts and all these other accusations. It's like, that's outside of the Epstein files, and yet he's still your guy, right? You still say you're a protector of women and children. Absolutely on point there. Brilliant. Okay, so we're just gonna bring this to a close. So but we need to spend a little time on reform. So convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein giving his mobile number to Nick Candy so they can, quote, deal directly. This man is now the treasurer of Reform UK. They're all connected. The establishment is enmeshed. There you go. Okay. So Nick Candy made money from Epstein, which Farage seems to confirm he has. Considering that Nick Candy is also one of Reform UK's biggest donors, that means Reform UK is running on Epstein money? Does that work? Because that's pretty controversial, right? Email to Nick Candy, treasurer of Reform UK. Ghislaine was very disappointed that you didn't tell her you were coming into town. Anything to say, Reform, about this? And of course, the connections are there, right? We already know that, if you're talking about Jeffrey Epstein being connected to Russia, we already know that Nathan Gill and Reform UK and the previous iterations through the Brexit Party and UKIP were connected to Russia, and Nigel Farage is connected to Russia. There's no overstating, says The Nerve, how significant the Nathan Gill case is. On Friday, so this is back when UKIP Reform politician and close associate Nigel Farage was jailed for over 10 years for taking multiple bribes via handler from a friend of Putin. It's a complex, detail-heavy story. So they go through all of that. But Nathan Gill and Reform, clearly, at least in this case, very closely connected to Russia there. So I've missed, unfortunately, damn it. I did have another I did have another source there that was supposed to come next, but I've lost it. I didn't paste it properly. But anyway, Byline Times, Nigel Farage is part of Putin's plot against UK. So Nigel Farage has been paid by Trump crypto advisor who worked with Russian operative Paul Manafort, the guy I mentioned earlier, who's a campaign manager for Trump and Trump 1.0, connected to Russia, was then put in prison and then pardoned by Trump, but is connected to all these kind of Russian oligarchs like Derek Preska and so on and so forth. Anyway, a crypto advisor who worked with Paul Manafort has been paying Nigel Farage, paid by Trump crypto advisor who worked with Russian operative Paul Manafort. And so, you know, all these connections, all these moneyed connections. The UK is far from perfect, but in response to the Epstein files, a prince has been disgraced and stripped of his titles. Peter Mandelson has resigned and will hopefully be kicked away. He's out of the Lords and he's lost his job and they're investigating him. And yet we're not seeing any legal repercussions in the US yet. Like Ghislaine Maxwell's in prison, but everyone else is redacted on the files where it should be the victims are redacted, but instead you get the perpetrators redacted. And this is the idea that Marina was saying against Andrea Jenkins on the TV program just then. Is like, you think there's due process going on in the United States? They're redacting the perpetrators. They're protecting the perpetrators. This is about protecting the elites. It really, really is. But, you know, when you talk about the far right, there's also been linked with Tommy Robinson gets funded by money that comes out of Israel. That's a known fact now. But there's links between Tommy Robinson, the far right, Russia, Israel, Bannon, so on and so forth. Tommy Robinson and a London news website linked to a Putin-backed propaganda network. And this is why I support the Byline Times, by the way, is because they do really good investigative journalism. Far-right activist Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, who's Tommy Robinson, was appointed as an ambassador to an unregistered charity connected to a Russian black PR operation. So the far right, and I won't go to the details of this, you can go and read this, it's free to view. But, you know, the far right in the UK is connected very closely, as it is all across Europe, to Russia. And we need to be very, very aware of that. And just a final thing on just elites and money and political party support. Reform is attracting an awful lot of big money at the moment in a way that Labour Party, even the Conservative Party, doesn't attract that from abroad, right? Conservative Party usually gets that from moneyed interests in the UK. Labour gets it from the unions, Lib Dems, you know, whatever. But Reform is attracting an absolute bunch of money, right? But when you follow the money, it's dodge. Only in Brexit Britain can a church warden who works for an Iranian-born billionaire donate £200,000 to a political party, Reform UK. The billionaire, Sasan Gandhari, also paid for Nigel Farage to attend Davos. And yet there isn't a peep from the authorities or government who are supposed to be protecting our democracy from foreign influence. So you get a church warden, suddenly has £200,000, gives that to Reform UK. This comes from a billionaire, Iranian-born billionaire. What is going on there? At the same time that Nigel Farage is going out to Dubai, claiming that Keir Starmer's never there. Well, Nigel Farage has never been to Clacton, his own constituency, and instead goes to Dubai to have meals with billionaire Sri Lankans or whoever it was, an Indian guy. Yeah, seriously. But that money for Davos is interesting because normally if you're a top tier politician, you get invited to Davos. He wasn't invited because he's not a top tier politician. So he had to pay, basically. He forked out the corporate rate of £50,000 for his accreditation. And that was paid by Sasan Gandhari, who had to fork it out so that he could go to Davos. And the idea that he doesn't know who this person is and hasn't looked into it is staggering, right? And this is a level of kind of like moneyed elites, like join the dots kind of stuff that's going on in our different national politics. This is Nigel Farage, like, waving away difficult questions on this money.
Second one, there was a story in the Sunday Times that a conveyancer called John Richard Simpson has given £200,000 to your party. And he's the head of this little known interior design firm that's donated 7 other times to the party. Do you know him? He wouldn't tell the Sunday Times what the source of the funds were.
No, he wasn't one of my contacts. No, most of the donors I know, certainly all of the big donors I know, and you'll be finding out a lot more about that, of course, in a few weeks' time when the Q1 figures are published, and you'll be perhaps quite surprised by what you see. But I didn't know this individual, but I did look at the story, did check it out with our compliance department. Everything's legal, everything's above board. They can speculate about this individual till the cows come home, but it's a legitimate company. He's a perfectly legitimate.
So he's saying he's a legitimate guy. I mean, I've read the story. I've asked my compliance department to look into it, blah, blah, blah. But this guy's just, he seems to like, I don't know who he is. I've looked into it. He's all right. The company's legit. I've reported on that company before. It's not legitimate. It's like some kind of shell company. So that's dodgy in itself. But the idea that he doesn't know this guy, I don't know this donor, yet this is a guy that paid for him to go to Davos. If you don't know who paid for you to go to Davos, I'm sorry, you're involved in corruption somewhere. There's something dodgy going on, Nigel Farage, and you need the crap investigated out of you, because, you know, you are hoping to be the Prime Minister of the UK, and let's hope that doesn't happen. But you are as dodgy as they come. Right, and you're taking money from left, right, and centre. And if you're telling me you didn't know where £200,000 came from, and then £50,000 to take you to Davos, you end up in Davos. I don't know how I'm here. I don't know how I'm here. I don't know who paid for me. And then you go back to a press conference. Like, we looked at who paid for you. What do you have to say to that? Oh yeah, I read that story. Yeah, God, I just appeared in Davos. I don't know how I got there. Just like I woke up one morning, and I was in Davos. Who knew? Absolutely ridiculous. So a few people have asked about this fascinating story by our Rowan Mason, which others have followed up and expanded on. So I'm sharing it here. This is in The Guardian. It is Nigel Farage's trip to Davos, hosted and paid for by a family trust of a billionaire. She revealed last week that Nigel Farage's trip to Davos was hosted and paid for by a $10 billion family trust of an Iranian-born billionaire. The trust is not Reform's only link to the Gandhari family. Last year, she reported that Reform UK received £200,000 in donations from a small design and architecture firm that had faced a winding up petition from HMRC. So it's a design and architecture firm that appears to have never done any design and architecture, and then it faced a winding up petition from some dodgy thing that just funnels money into Reform. Interior Architecture Landscape, which is run by a man called John Simpson, confirmed to her last week that the Gandhari family are its clients. A spokesperson said its decisions to donate the money to Reform was made independently by the company's management and not the Gandhari family itself. But like, it's all so freaking dodgy. Like, so much of it is dodgy. Yeah, and he's just like joining the dots. The last thing, this is the very last thing I have to show you. And this is a kind of joining the dots, the far right. You got Bannon, you got Teal, you got Tucker Carlson, whose father is on the board of directors for the lobbying firm that lobbies on behalf of Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is someone that Steve Bannon lobbies for. You've got Peter Thiel involved, no doubt, with this whole, I don't know, I assume he's involved somewhere along the line with something to do with Viktor Orban. That's forget that last bit, but the point is that there are all these dots, and then you have Tucker Carlson saying this the other day.
But I know a fair amount about Keir Starmer, and you will never convince me, at gunpoint even, that Keir Starmer is making independent decisions about the future of Britain. Just, you can't convince me of that. He's not adequate as a leader of a nation. He just doesn't have the basic qualities. He is taking orders. That could not be clearer. And I think it's clear to the British population. But you don't know who's giving those orders.
No, I mean, I don't know who's giving those orders. I think if we...
This is just ridiculous. Like, Keir Starmer's getting orders and he's not making any decisions independently. He's just a puppet. Says a man who's clearly puppeting Russian propaganda. This is a guy who is getting orders to say what he says from Viktor Orban, from the moneyed interests of the Heritage Foundation and whatever. It's like who is one of the dots in this constellation of dots that connect Peter Thiel to Steve Bannon to Jeffrey Epstein. Tucker Carlson there just regurgitating the same old crap, and then attacking a centrist democratically elected government. So I think that kind of sums everything up to me, really. So like, if I was to sum this all up to you, it's like democracy is under attack, and it's under attack by moneyed interests. And this is where it all sounds a bit conspiracy theory, but no, we've got the emails, like the data is coming in. Yeah, we've got Peter Thiel and his his ideology. We already know, he's publicly talked about it. He's a techno-fascist or a tech fascist. He is doesn't believe in democracy. He believes in technates, where these tech companies make the decisions for you. He's getting all these contracts in all of these governments. He's connected to all these other people through Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein connects Russia and Israel to Steve Bannon, to all the right-wing, far-right groups in Europe, where he's tried to network them all through his own group called The Movement. And Jeffrey Epstein is facilitating this. Money is going left, right, and center. Jeffrey Epstein ends up being super rich somehow. No one really knows how. And then wire transfers are passing through Jeffrey Epstein to left, right, and center. And it's just like, oh my goodness, this is just like, give me back simple democracy. Give me back sovereignty, whereby, we're making our own decisions and we don't have moneyed interests and elites, being as evil as they appear to be. And Jeffrey Epstein is one of these spiders who has spun this web of deceit and lies, but also of morally reprehensible behavior. But he's connected from every point that he finishes. With his web, he connects another elite and another oligarch and another ne'er-do-well, and also intellectualists, and also artists, your Woody Allens of the world, your Noam Chomskys of the world, your Bill Gates of the world, and your all these people from all directions and all areas of life. And not all of them are going to be bad people on account of knowing Jeffrey Epstein, particularly if it's before 2008, right? So we need to be careful. But certainly after 2008, you've got to question anyone that has anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. And we've got just this whole web of questionable activity and influence, money and power. And it is exceptionally worrying. And Putin is there. Putin is there. Russia is right in the mix. I'm certain of that. I needed a stiff drink. Hopefully that all made sense. I'm just going to go through some of the chats that I didn't get to. Okay, Goose says, and thanks for all these, Goose. If I was made to place a bet, I would say he had some kind of link to Mossad. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense when you look at this connection with Ghislaine and her father's own proven connections to Israel. Totally agree to that. I think he is linked to Mossad. I think he is linked to the FSB and Putin. To say all of this makes many run to the hills because of fears of sounding anti-Semitic, but the Israeli state has a long history of engaging in illegal and immoral actions to further their interests. This is the age-old problem of not being able to criticize Israel because it seems like you're anti-Semitic when you're just criticizing that kind of Zionism of Israel from a political point of view. And it's very carefully delineating like Jewishness from the Israeli nation. We should, of course, be able to criticize the Israeli nation on account of their actions and their behaviors. Like, I criticize them over what they've done in Gaza for sure. Right. And they are, particularly under the present government, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, those are evil people. They are effectively, and this is a weird concoction, but they are Israeli fascists. Right. So, we should be able to criticize Israel as a nation for sure. Rick from the Netherlands. Epstein wasn't the only one whose suicide was controversial. Brunel's suicide as well. I was shocked by the latest implied connections. There is much power involved and we only see the tip of the iceberg. I don't know, who do you mean by Brunel? Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who created the suspension bridge over Bristol? No? Okay. I'd have to find out about that. Niels Clement, thank you, Niels. Really appreciate that. And Kevin Force, thank you so much for your support. Thank you, Rick from the Netherlands. Hierarchical tree is vulnerable, spiderweb is strong. Yeah, that's an interesting metaphorical discussion. Mitch Mazarel, in light of these recent revelations, I have had a hard time believing that the Five Eyes did not have a pretty good idea of what was going on with Epstein and his cabal of willing accomplices and their scheming. This is a really good point, Mitch. Like, how much did the CIA know? Why was there no kind of holding him to account? Was he doing things that were beneficial to the CIA, but then was he doing things beneficial to the FSB? And how do those two ideas work together? Like, yeah, what is going on there? And the same could be said about Mandelson and the British intelligence services. But I also think the intelligence services are probably much better than they are. I don't mean better, I mean more capable than they are. We watch spy films and we imagine they've got these massive screens and they've got the most amazing tech and they can see everything. They've got satellites. I don't think that, unfortunately, is actually reality. And a lot of stuff gets missed. These are human beings just trying to keep a handle on everything that goes on in the country. And it's really freaking difficult. So I think possibly we often overestimate the knowledge and the abilities of our intelligence services. Yeah, they listen in, but there's an awful lot to listen to these days. And it's probably quite easy to miss things and to turn a blind eye. And, it was interesting in the discussion about Peter Mandelson that Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart were saying, why wasn't Peter Mandelson better vetted? And one of the reasons they gave is because he'd already been an MP, there was this sense that you don't vet someone as much then. And so he kind of got a bit of a free pass. But that could be a reason. So it's this idea that our intelligence services aren't always doing everything at all times, and they are not omniscient. But thanks, Mitch. Mon Zucker Biscuit, thank you for 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate that, mate. And finally, Johnny Nedregard from Norway, appreciate your support, mate. I say finally, Rick from the Netherlands, back in with Brunel, Epstein's best friend, who was imprisoned and committed suicide. He knew a lot. Knowledge is power until you get imprisoned. And then, topped off. That interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, I'm no expert on Epstein. All I'm trying to do is synthesize all the information that I'm coming across to generate something of a plausible explanation of what's going on, and to try and get us to understand that we need to be very wary of powerful elites who are trying to control the world and have their own agenda of what the world should look like. These holistic political agendas. I'm not talking about some, I know Warren Buffett and Howard Buffett, who like billionaires and like, right, I'm going to change this little thing, or like, I want to fund this like scheme to make it better, or even with, say, Bill Gates. I know Bill Gates is controversial with regard to Epstein, but say the Bill and Melinda Foundation, where they're trying to stop malaria, something like that. That's like, oh yeah, thank you, that's nice, that's decent. That's like, you're taking a thing that's a challenge to the world and you're making it better. I get that, that's cool. But then when you have Peter Thiel and Steve Bannon going, yeah, I've got a bunch of money and influence, and do you know what I'm doing with that money and influence? I'm making the world a complete spider's web of the far right influence, and I want to get back to 1939 or whatever. You're like, what about malaria? I don't know. Maybe too many road traffic accidents on the A27. Just that bit where it goes over there. People get knocked over there. Why don't you look at that? Maybe there aren't enough crested newts in the local ponds. We need some more crested newts. Well, how about that? Instead of like, no, I'm going to take over the world and I'm going to be the Emperor of Darkness. Like, really? Is that you get that powerful and that's what you want to do? You are just a bastard. Like, Peter Thiel and Steve Bannon are just bastards. And I think that's my conclusion of today's lesson. Thank you. Please do your homework. Wipe your shoes on the way out. Oh no, it should be on the way in. Just don't forget your coats. And I'll see you tomorrow for the next lesson. Toodle pips, everybody. Thank you very much for your super chats and for your kind support for the channel. Thanks to the mods. Sorry this has been so long, but it's a lot to talk about. I'm exhausted. I need to lie down.